Okay, it looks like people are joining us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this REL Pacific webinar, Adapting Educator Professional Learning to a Virtual Environment. We hope you're all staying safe and well, and we very much appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today for this important discussion. My name is Kirsten Miller. I'm a Communications Manager at REL Pacific, and I'll be your facilitator today. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce our presenters, but first I'd like to quickly run through a couple of housekeeping issues, provide you with today's agenda and objectives, and a little bit of information about REL Pacific and the region we serve. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. I think most of us at this point are probably very familiar with Zoom. We are going to ask you to mute your lines so that we can avoid echoes and feedback, but we do encourage you to use that chat box whenever you have questions or would like to make observations. We do have some reflection questions that we're going to ask you to respond to in the chat box as well. And we've saved time at the end for a question and answer session. My colleague Betsy Calloway is our technical facilitator today. So if you run into any technical difficulties, please do go ahead and shoot her a note in the chat box and we will do our best to address those. So first things first, let's start with today's agenda. Welcome, introductions, and overview is first. That's where we are now. Strategies and considerations for adapting professional learning to an online environment is next. And then again, as I mentioned, we have some time for questions and answers and discussion. So again, we're currently in the welcome section of our agenda. So welcome again, everybody. We're really glad that you're here. I've already introduced myself, and now it's my privilege to introduce and welcome my colleagues and today's presenters. So Megan Taylor is a managing consultant at REL Pacific and supports educator effectiveness and early learning for the REL Pacific contract. She spent 14 years teaching at the elementary level, and after that she worked as an educational consultant in professional development and instructional coaching, working with teachers and instructional coaches to help them understand how to most effectively help all students learn. Kent Davis is an associate director at McREL and conducts workshops and training for K-12 teachers and administrators on research-based leadership and instructional practices, and that includes principal and teacher evaluation. He also works with school leadership teams on implementing research-based practices to improve student learning. So Kent has served as a teacher and administrator, including as an associate superintendent in public education for 32 years. So now that you have met us, we'd like to meet you. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment to share in the chat box a little bit about your role and what you might hope to learn from our time together today. And while you are doing that, I will quickly run through today's objective and provide an overview of REL Pacific. So today's objective is about using adult learning theory and the characteristics of high-quality professional learning to discuss how to adapt educator professional learning to a virtual environment. Throughout the webinar, you're going to see these icons. That top icon will denote when we're talking about adult learning principles. That middle icon is going to show you when we're talking about the characteristics of high quality professional learning. And then that puzzle icon on the bottom is about putting it all together. So that's about using specific online learning strategies to weave in those adult learning and high quality professional learning characteristics so that we can adapt professional learning and professional development to a virtual environment. So if you are not familiar with the Regional Educational Laboratory Program, I'd like to just quickly tell you a little bit about us. REL Pacific's one of 10 regional educational laboratories, or RELs, that are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. So on this map, you can see the illustration of all 10 of those regions. The region that we serve includes educators in the state of Hawaii, in 3 U.S. territories, including American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and then 3 independent nations in free association with the U.S. So that's the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, which includes Koshrai, Pohnpei, Chuuk, and Yap, and then also the Republic of Palau. So that is an extremely geographically vast region. It spans roughly 5 million square miles,
And within these jurisdictions, we work with a number of research practice partnerships, and those focus on the 5 high priority areas that you see on your screen now. So that's college and career readiness and success, which is about aligning system expectations for K through 12 graduates with entry into college and the workforce. And then professional learning, which is today's topic. That's about collaborating with teachers and system leaders to create a professional learning environment, not only in which teacher development is welcomed by teachers, but in which there's some ownership and in which it works. Language and literacy is about developing language skills and literacy goals in multilingual contexts, and that's primarily in the lower grades. And then social and emotional learning. We've been doing actually quite a bit of work on social and emotional learning in the last few months during the COVID pandemic, kind of discussing how we can use social and emotional competencies and supports to improve student outcomes. And then data use and readiness focuses on increased institutional data use for improving system and student outcomes. So this slide just provides a very quick snapshot of the professional learning work that we currently have underway in the region. And you can see from here that we have partnerships for the improvement of teaching in the Republic of Palau, in Chuk, Koshrai, Pohnpei, and in Yap. And now we're going to move into our strategies. But first, we'd like to ask you to answer a couple of reflection questions, again, in the chat box. So we'd like you to think about the professional development that you and your teachers have had over the last few years and answer these questions in the chat box. So what is still in place? What is making a positive difference in student learning? And then what is making a positive difference in teachers' practices and knowledge? And we're going to circle back to that after our discussion today. So if you could just give that a little bit of thought and add some answers there in the chat box. I am about to hand this over to Kent to get into our strategies. On this slide here, you'll see an infographic that we created about using professional learning standards to increase educators' capacity. It's based on the Learning Forward standards for professional learning. So we'll be discussing those throughout the next hour and 15 minutes. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Kent.
Really want to begin with talking about the difference between professional development and professional learning. And sometimes we get questions as, what is that difference? Most of us in education have experienced professional development, either as a participant or even as a presenter. And as you look at these bullets, what stands out is that professional development is done with teachers. It's usually very short. You sit, you get. In PD and professional learning, the emphasis really is on the application of what we're learning. And going on that next slide, you'll see some more examples here of how professional development versus professional learning. I'll give you a couple of moments to sort of look at some of these bullets. We don't want to come away with the impression that professional development is bad and everything has to be professional learning. This gives you some examples. Some questions you may ask is, what is the content you want to present? And what do you want the participants to do with that content? So at one point in my career, I was a principal. An example of professional development would be, we're going to change our lunch procedures, how kids go into the cafeteria or something like that. I'm going to do a quick professional development on those new procedures. It's more information for the teachers or for whoever the audience is, what I want them to get. On the other hand, if I'm really thinking about how do teachers arrange their reading groups using available formative data, I want them to more interact and be able to apply that information. And so I will use those standards and what we know about professional learning with that. And so it depends on, what is it you want people to do, what's that content, and how you want them to interact with that. And that next slide, these bullets can give you some guidelines in deciding whether you want to do professional development or professional learning. Increase teachers' knowledge, ability to improve practice, and you can read the rest that's in there. Those bullets really would say, okay, I want professional learning to happen. In our current online environment, it's important that we not fall into the trap of just providing professional development. It's not a sit and get, let me tell you about these things. And so Megan and I are going to go through and really offer you some strategies as you begin to navigate professional learning with the online environment. And you'll see a poll that's coming up. So here's a poll. Betsy, if you'll throw that up on the screen. There you go. You should see a poll that says online learning. How would you rank your level of comfort with online learning? Check there. If for some reason you don't see that poll, let me read the poll to you and you can put your answers in there. How would you rank your level of comfort with online learning? Very comfortable, you're an expert, somewhat comfortable, you're not comfortable at all. So either do the poll or submit your answer in the chat box. Question, is a learner or a facilitator? Since we're talking about this, I think good question. Respond as a facilitator. We'll give people another 60 seconds. Okay, Betsy, are you able to see the results or the poll? Most people are able to get to the poll?
I've got those results, Kent. This is Kirsten again. So it looks like we have, the majority of people are somewhat comfortable at 66%. We have 26% who are very comfortable or expert, and then not too many who are not comfortable, about 8%.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. Turn this over to Megan now.
All right, let me just shut this poll down and then we will move on to the next strategy. Megan, this is all yours.
Okay. Oh, am I in? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. So we are, like Kent and Kirsten said, hoping to share some strategies with you to help you as you're moving to an online format to develop your professional learning. As we know, we really don't know how long we're going to be in quarantine or doing this learning the way that we are now. But what we do know is that what we have learned from COVID is that things won't go back to exactly how they were before. And so being on top of that would be wise for all of us. And so we hope today's strategies will help you. The first strategy we want to share with you is one of those things that we say all the time when it comes to teaching, and that's good practice is good practice. that doesn't change when we're teaching students, and that doesn't change when we're teaching adults. The first strategy when you're trying to take your professional learning from an in-person to a virtual format is to convene an online learning development team. We know that when it comes to any kind of instruction of a group, that collaborating with others will help. But what we want to consider then is why this would be important for adult learners. And the first reason is that we know that adult learners are more engaged when they can do two things. When they can identify their own learning goals and when they're able to influence the direction of their learning. When you can create a team that's able to focus on those things, you're going to have a better result. Additionally, as the next slide says, when you create that team, you want to be considering the people you put on that team. Particularly, some very particular things you want to think about is that you want to bring in people from diverse backgrounds with diverse experience. When you're trying to create a virtual learning environment, you're going to bring together people from all different backgrounds. By convening this team of people together, we're able to consider the different adult learners that are going to be joining us with their strengths and their experience, and very importantly, with their comfort level with technology. You want to make sure that people on your team are both digital natives and those who might be less comfortable with technology, so that you can make sure that the virtual learning environment you create caters to both. I just had such a great experience with this week as I was working on something, and my daughter came in the room and asked and suggested that I try an online learning platform. And I was telling her, no, it's not really going to work, and I think it's going to be too difficult. And she kind of encouraged me just to try. And it ended up really changing that virtual learning opportunity for the participants, because she had brought in something new and had the background to be able to say, no, they'll be able to do this and it'll work just fine. So it's a great example of why it's important to bring in lots of different members to that team. When it comes to professional learning then, we know that the professional learning strategies that are important, that why we bring this team together, are that we want to make sure that even in a virtual context, the professional learning is aligned to school improvement goals and it's aligned to student curriculum standards. There's nothing more frustrating to teachers, as you know, than showing up to a professional development that they don't feel has any impact on the work that they're doing. I can remember going to a course, and that part of it was on puppeteering. And I have a lot of respect for the use of puppets and things like childhood psychology and those kind of things. But that was just not something that was going to impact my instruction at that time. And so when you're creating that virtual learning, you have to still keep these things in mind, that these are very important to teachers. So what does that mean when you're bringing it all together? When you're bringing together what we know about adult learning and what we know about the characteristics of high quality professional development, as you bring it together, the first thing that we need to consider is to focus on the online learning, to focus your team on these three phases of content development. So your team should be considering the people who will be participating and the skills that need to be developed. Those are very, very important. So your team needs to sit down and have that conversation. And remember, as you're building online content, your purpose is to move people from point A to point B. So what are the things in this training that are going to be important to move people? That's the second step, your content design. And then finally, the content development. As a team, consider the technical considerations, platforms, how you're gonna share this, if this is gonna be a synchronous thing or people can do it asynchronously, those kind of things. Secondly, when it comes to putting it all together, you wanna consider, can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Consider reviewing your existing professional learning calendar. Is there content you were already going to discuss, things that are already of importance to your team that can quickly be adjusted to be delivered remotely? or does it necessitate something else? One of the things that Kent and I do is travel all over the Pacific to facilitate professional development opportunities. And as we do that, we have the opportunity to do week-long principals academies during the summer. Now, one of the difficult things in the Pacific is that, for example, in Yap in Micronesia, for teachers to get over for these principals, not teachers, for administrators to get over for these principals academy, it's an 8-day boat ride for some of them. So this is not something we can facilitate mid-year. This is only something that we can facilitate over the summer. And as we've had to consider with COVID, the lack of travel that we can do now, we've had to take into consideration, can we just take this content into a virtual context? Or do we need to shift some things around because of the situation? In addition, one of the things you want to consider is what kind of scenarios, what kind of things you're going to be working on because of the situation. You have to, yeah, next slide, Kirsten. What kind of scenario, we don't know, right? And I've said this already, what kind of scenario we're going to be dealing with. And so planning ahead for different kinds of scenarios when you're planning this virtual learning. And then also, next slide, being able to be flexible when it comes to planning. So it's one of those things, much like classroom teaching, where you want to do all that you can to plan and then also be able to be flexible. So Kirsten, go ahead and go to the reflection slide. We have a question for you again, if you'll share with us in the chat box. How are your school improvement and student learning goals shifting as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? What has changed for your school improvement plans? What's changed for your learning goals? Go ahead and take just a minute to answer in the chat box.
Okay, so we have a few answers coming in. Tech skills for staff and students, reteaching how to do effective teaching virtually. Teachers are stressed out, can't focus on professional learning. Tech skill integration and accessibility, that seems to be a big one. Carol says actually that their teacher learning is all contextualized around remote instruction.
Nice.
And then we have topics and needs that are rising up as priorities that weren't on original plans but need to be responded to. Planning for reentry, that's a big one. Virtual teaching for students with disabilities. So, and these are flying by. I know I'm actually not reading all of them as they're coming through. Creating new course programs that will be totally online instead of hands-on and discussion. Learning goals have changed to help community college faculty adapt to online teaching. Let's see. How to reach students who don't have access to a device. Inquiry-based and project learning, building relationships, equity and internet access. So
These are all conversations. Yeah, these are all conversations everyone is having. Everyone is asking these questions. This is great. It's great. Okay, we're gonna have Kent go ahead and switch and share the next strategy with you.
Okay, there we go. Somehow we were muted there. And you'll find as these strategies that Megan and I are talking here, these strategies are just not about online learning. It's what good professional learning is, whether it's face-to-face, online, or hybrid. What we want to do is try to give some examples of some things that we can think of as we look at this new environment. So this strategy is about leveraging learners' background knowledge and professional experience. it's not what I call the professional development, or what we use is what I call the baby bird syndrome, where you just open your mouth and we'll feed you with information. We really want to base information on what the background knowledge is. So you'll see some of these characteristics that you can start to leverage in designing. Is the first one, to integrate theories. Is that theories of collaboration. It's action oriented, knowing that some of that human learning is that people want to do something with it. That's what we mean by that action. And it's based on some experience, that we model good teaching strategies. We model what we want our participants to do. And then the last one is, probably should have my name by it: prioritize, monitor, and coordinate resources. Don't give everybody everything. Be real intentional about what's the material that you want people to have. I think it's real easy to say, oh, we'll just give them all. So really be intentional about your resources and how you prioritize. So as part of that adult learning theory, we know that there's a social aspect of learning is important. And the first one's about, well, back on up there. There we go. Leadership capacity is having people reach full leadership capacity. So what we mean, and we'll talk about leadership capacity in one of the other strategies, this is the leadership capacity, is using your participants, using your staff or the people that you're working with to help present, to really think about how they start to lead in working in the background knowledge and professional experience. Megan talked about teams. That's another way to get people to really start to think about their leadership. PL takes time and planning. And so when we're thinking about advocating for professional learning implementation, it's really about making sure we have the time and we put the resources for what is truly good professional learning. So then the next strategy, continuing to putting it all together. So how do we do this in an online environment? What we talk about, if possible, and it's not always possible, an online survey prior to the course, finding out what people know, maybe what they want to learn. That's easier, you know, in a smaller group, and when you have time and it's going to be multiple sessions. You could do in an online session, you could, you know, allow for the flexibility, having people do a survey at the beginning, similar to what we did on this one, but then you're going to have to possibly anticipate your learner's background and build some activities. So maybe a reflection sheet would be questions designed for different levels of understanding. Next slide. As PL is ongoing, getting feedback from participants and incorporating that feedback into further sessions is important. So you finish a session. What is your structure that you've established that allows you to get input from the participants to say, increase the pace, slow down the pace, we need more things, and really being able to change what we do. I think that's important in an online environment. Megan and I were talking prior to this and doing the webinar. One of the things that's easy to do in a face-to-face session is read the group. You know, are you going too fast? And you can do some modifications. That's much tougher to do in that online, but based on some sort of survey with people's background knowledge and professional experience is really allowing for that feedback to make some mid-course adjustments. The next one, it's important to remember the problem is trying to do too much. Small chunks are better than an hour and a half of an online learning where we're going to sleep. So doing more, you know, shorter terms of things, thinking about how long people's attention, how long would you want to sit there? Also be specific with your goals and objectives. What is it that you want participants to walk away from, and be real narrow in your focus in trying to meet those objectives. We want to break up our session and use other resources, including online videos, etc. We also want to allow teachers an opportunity to take for credit, license renewal. A lot of teachers are trying to get their certificates through some professional hours that are necessary. You may want to think of some certificate afterwards to say they've completed 2 hours of some course with that. So really with this is making sure that you use that the leverage of the people's background knowledge when developing those courses. So here's a question, another chat box question. What kinds of skills and competencies do your teachers already possess that you can leverage when you develop online courses? And if you're not working with teachers but other groups, whatever that group that you're working with, think about how you could leverage that. How would you go about leveraging that? We'll take a couple of minutes.
We have a few answers coming through. One is unconscious competence. Another is that many of our participants have a wealth of experience already using interactive learning. Workshops already use a lot of small group discussions, so their experiences are key to those conversations being fruitful. Different levels of new tech skills, self-teaching strategies, some familiarity with things like Kahoot. This looks like teachers already have a variety of experience with some online learning platforms, curriculum expertise, knowing the district curriculum and experience teaching, but just need guidance on how to pivot to the virtual setting.
I think that the key for this one, before we turn it over to Megan, is really think about how intentional, to be intentional about how you leverage that sort of expertise that you just mentioned. And with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Kent. One of the answers I just saw that I think is vital, and I believe this with all of my heart, Jill Kramer said most teachers are caring and want the best for their students. And I think there's so much power in remembering that that's true. And that the truth of all of this is that when we light a fire under teachers, when they are motivated to do something, they can change the world. They're unstoppable. And so using the strengths, the interests that they have will propel your professional learning forward, whether virtually or in person. So to introduce the third strategy, I want to begin by just reading this paragraph, and I rarely do that. So it's one that really resonates with me. Whereas younger learners may expect to postpone their application of knowledge, adult learners are focused on immediately applying new knowledge and skills to their practice. As a result, rather than being subject-centered, adult learners are problem and solution-centered. This third strategy is to present online content in appropriate and manageable chunks. And when it comes to considering professional learning with this strategy, characteristics of it, there are two things we want to make sure we consider: that we're using research that is relevant and evidence-based and up-to-date, and that we're using a variety of sources. When we're planning on our online content, we want to start with good, solid research, good, solid works. As I have shifted in my role of classroom teacher to what I'm doing now, it's one of the things that I think we could be doing better, is looking at relevant evidence-based practice research. When it comes to this strategy and pulling it all together, I know my experience, I have done professional development for years now. And one of the things that I know about when teachers come to a professional learning opportunity is that they want strategies. They want to learn things that first are easy to understand, that are quick to implement, and have a great impact on their students. And so when we're pulling it together, we want to consider that teachers are looking for those things. They're not always possible, but that's what they're looking for. When you're considering then you're moving your in-person to virtual, and you're wanting to make sure you're doing this in manageable chunks, the first thing to consider when you're pulling all of this together is, should you take what you were going to do in person exactly as it was and move it to a virtual context? And the answer is no. Like I was talking about earlier, that week-long Principals Academy where we go to Micronesia and do these things, as Kent and I talked about trying to do this virtually, even if the time difference was not a problem, having principals sit for 5 days straight for 8 hours in person, that alone is fatiguing. But asking them to do it virtually through Zoom or anything else online synchronously would be terribly fatiguing for them. So trying to figure out how to break up that content, trying to figure out how to make it more manageable, whether that means putting it off, doing it later, doing it in chunks, whatever that might be. The next thing to consider when it comes to pulling things together is to consider the roles and competencies of your participants and their prior knowledge. One of the things I love when moving professional learning to an online content is giving people something to read, an assignment before they even begin. This gives them background to the course, and it begins the course, the professional learning opportunity, with everyone having a similar experience, having read the same thing, to be able to start it on a discussion right away. The next idea when it comes to pulling things together would be to think about strategies. This goes back to what I shared, strategies that teachers can immediately use with their students, but then looping back with them. So I saw in comments earlier some of the things that people are thinking about is coaching, or how to support teachers as they're implementing these things. There is so much research, and my background in instructional coaching, it's so vital when teachers have had a professional learning opportunity to work with them and have them work with a peer instructional coach to have them actually implement those strategies. It's vital to their work. And so finding a way, even in a virtual context, to loop back with them, to give them an opportunity to get feedback, or to have somebody as a thought partner to ask some questions to, it's vital in a virtual learning environment. And then finally, when it comes to pulling things together for this, oh, yes. I thought we had one more slide. I apologize. So looping back together. So we're ready for the next strategy, Kent.
So here's the next strategy. And as you see, as Megan and I are talking about the SATR strategies as separate strategies, there is a huge intertwining between each of the strategies. It's the teams to expertise. So this next strategy is really about the social nature of learning. What we need to do to provide for that social is incorporate some collaboration opportunities for teachers in online learning. And we can do that through breakout rooms, responding to other comments. We could do it through teams. There's a variety of ways where we can look at that. So one of these things is communities committed to continuous improvement. that has to be a framework for our collaborative learning. So why are we doing this? You know, is it just that I need to get the hours done, or the principal or somebody asks us to do it? Is it really should be tied to continuous improvement? We're trying to make a difference in how our students learn. Install that collective responsibility. Again, going back to the baby bird syndrome I talked about at the beginning, where we have people sit and just feed me what you want me to know and tell me what you want me to do, is that we have to develop a collective responsibility, is that I'm an active learner, whether this is online or where this is face-to-face. I have a role as an active learner. I have a responsibility to the group. One of the ways to do that is through operating agreements. You know, what are we agreeing to do by participating in that and setting that up at the beginning? And then last is again, promoting instruction collaborative opportunities for participants. How do I get to take what I just learned, have discussions with my colleagues about what does that mean here? So, and the next one, depending on the size of your group, this one talks about assigning a thought partner, or a mentor or coach, whatever. There's a little, little different roles that are there. If I'm doing it with a faculty where I know people, then I may say, okay, we're going to do it is with new teachers or grade levels, and I can do some assignments. Maybe if we're going to do chat rooms or breakout rooms for some online learning, I would assign a facilitator with that. Again, it's really about thinking about organizing the collaboration and just not saying working together. It's putting some thought to that. As with students, the next one, we want teachers to have the opportunity to present their learning in a variety of ways. So how do I show you that I've learned something? And I think that's where we have to be flexible and encouraging creativity. So maybe I show you as a videotape of a classroom of something that I've presented. Maybe it's a PowerPoint. Maybe it's a report, or I'm writing a poem. So there's different ways for people to really show what they've learned in different ways, and that includes that social aspect. And you can do that together as a team or an individual. Moving on to that next strategy is really about providing opportunities for self-directed learning. As we have already mentioned, adult learners are self-directed and self-motivated. How do we help with that as we move some things? So some characteristics of that, here comes that leadership capacity. And we talked about providing opportunities for people to share in their leadership of learning. I interpret this as really allowing participants to lead themselves in how they best learn. Is to sort of say, this is the way that I learn best, and take an active role in our own learning and not be passive about that. We have to, as facilitators or organizing of that online learning environment, is create that atmosphere where I can start to think about my own self-directed learning and what does that look like. And it's real similar to what we try to do with kids. But now it's a little different. So there. Putting it together, it's how do we allow flexibility for educators to pursue their own learning interest. And this isn't about, I want to study everything. It's still within the goals of how we set up this, what the outcomes and the goals are for this online learning. How do we allow participants to maybe move in a direction that really fits within those goals, and that's allowing flexibility. And I think this is tough at times, is still keeping people on track for what you want to learn, but then allowing that flexibility in how people go about learning. And it's tough to do with kids. And next slide there. So to provide for a self-directed learner, we incorporate many different experiences for the learners. Some are going to be self-directed, asynchronous. You know, give me a time to learn this best for me. For me, that could be from 5 to 6 in the morning. For others of you, it could be 11 to 12 at night. So that I have a chance to do learning that really fits within me. But also, we put in the collaborative communities and that involvement of really refining the learning. How do we get that done? How do we work with educators to do that? And I think that has to come with a combination of how we present some things that we'll talk on. So, and with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Okay, so this is the final strategy that we have to share with you all today. And this strategy goes back to what I was referring to earlier. And I think it is one of the greatest pitfalls that is actually happening as we move professional learning to a virtual format. No longer is there support for implementation. No longer is there the ability to collaborate and get feedback from others, because anything that's being implemented is being done virtually. So this strategy is to encourage you all to continue to provide sustained support for initial implementation and throughout the professional learning experiences. We know, as this slide says, that adult learners will come with different backgrounds, with different skill sets and competencies. It's important, even in this virtual setting that we're in right now, to provide them with supports as they implement these new strategies. When it comes to professional learning, we know there's numerous things that tell us that this is important, but to do that, we need to make sure we provide for initial implementation experiences and long-term, long-lasting change. We know that we want lasting change. Let me say it this way. We also know that Joyce and Shower's research from the 80s tells us that nothing teachers learn is actually going to affect students unless they have feedback and support with implementation. If we're not trying to move people, like I said, from point A to point B, then there's no point in you doing that virtual professional learning. But if your focus is to move people, you have to provide them support once you've given them the virtual opportunity. So how do we put this all together? How do we offer that support? First of all, try to provide feedback. So if teachers have had a virtual learning opportunity, feedback doesn't change from that versus in person versus what we tell teachers and ask teachers to do in their classroom for their students. Feedback should be prompt, professional, and specific, and it should be done formatively and summatively. So how could you do that in your setting? Well, one of the ways that we've seen some principals trying to do this, and again, you know, I'm speaking specifically about principals here, but how could you apply this to your situation? Principals are getting online and watching little cross sections of teachers' online instruction with their students to see kind of things that might be coming to the surface as concerns across the board, as concerns maybe or ways to support that teacher. If they're not instructing online, they may be talking to their teachers on the phone or in other ways, to talking with students to see how are things going, what's going well. We're seeing a lot of surveys going out to families and students. How are things going? What could we be doing better? How do we need to improve things in order to get an idea of what's going well and what's being implemented in this situation. Another way to put these things together is to consider scheduling office hours. Now we know with quarantines and those kind of things, those aren't always possible. However, many of those things are being lifted where you might be able to do one-on-one meetings at your school with people, or even virtual hangouts where you're having office hours with students, with parents, with teachers to find out how things are going and how you can support them further. You can also use other virtual or online platforms like instant messaging or other things to find out. So we want to know from you then, how are you, this is another reflect question in the chat box, how or what structures do you already have in place to provide feedback? And this question, I hope you'll go back as people, I hope, first of all, I hope you'll answer, but I hope you'll have a chance to look at people's answers, because this is one of those opportunities for collaboration that we don't often get when we're working in a virtual environment. So what structures do you already have in place that you can think of to provide feedback and support to the educators you work with? And how can you transition this to an online environment? And again, as people share answers, feel free to write down some of those answers if those are things that you can use as well. I think Kirsten will take us through some of them as they come through.
It looks like we have one response, Qualtrics surveys and polls in Zoom. As an Office 365 district, we use bookings to allow anyone to schedule small group or one-on-one time. Virtual office hours, although Kelsey's telling us that virtual office hours are not well attended. Encourage attendees.
That's very interesting. Nope, they're not very well attended by students either. My kids' school has found that they have to actually assign kids to come to virtual office hours, not just make it if you'd like to come.
So we've got a lot of great ideas here. I send out a monthly question prompt to the cohort of participants that encourages them to touch base via email or office hours. Small group check-ins, embedding questions that we want feedback on into the presentation, feedback via Moodle comments or in emails to individual teachers, weekly reflections with comments sent within a day. Microsoft Teams, we actually use that ourselves professionally here, my colleagues Megan and Kent and Betsy and I. But that is hard to use and kids can't sign in easily to that. See, teachers say they don't think, oh, that's interesting. So we have one comment that teachers say they don't think their concerns are worth bothering them with during virtual office hours, despite trying to correct that perception.
Like I said earlier, we found that to be true of teachers, adults, and students. Those virtual office hours, at least in the beginning, I would encourage you to make those, to assign small groups to attend, just to get the conversation started.
Got social media apps. So there's a lot of really good information here, and I believe we are able to pull down all of the chat responses here. So I think in our follow-up, it may be helpful for us to pull those and categorize them for people for each of these feedback questions, because we've got such great engagement. And I know I would like to be able to go back to refer to those. So if that's something that's useful, then we can definitely send that in a follow-up.
Great. All right, Kent, I think you have our last strategy.
So it's one of the, present online content in a variety of formats to meet the needs of learners, but I also think it needs to meet the needs of the content. And I was reading some of the chats earlier, and a lot of the strategies that we've shared, I know are not new to you. The question is, how do we do that in an online environment? So some of the internal discussions that we've had as a group in talking with clients who are looking at things is that we're using a variety of resources. You go to the next slide, Kirsten. So we have an online platform that we do for some things. It's called Thinkific, and we use that. But we also are having to use, based on what we want the participants to do, it becomes a combination of things. Thinkific is good for some asynchronous stuff, and we can do some questions. Maybe it's a live Zoom meeting. Maybe it's a Google Hangout. And so we're looking at the technology based on what's the content we want to deliver and what is it the interaction that we want of the learners. So we're not using just one thing for everybody. And sometimes that's email, sometimes that's documents. And I think that is one of the tough issues that we have. It's looking at different delivery methods based on the content and what we want people to do with that. And you can do the books club. You guys know about study groups and book clubs, and this one just says, you know, don't always have everybody read the same book, but maybe some books. You could have 3 different books on instruction if you wanted to have some things. But look at the how you deliver the content and what is it you want to do. You can move on, Kirsten. Here's some just online resources that are there for some free or low-cost resources for you. We'll make sure you have access when we follow up with you so that you can see some of these things that are out there and put on that chat box.
And Kent, this is Kirsten again. If I can just jump in, I was excited to see in the chat that some of the things that people are grappling with are things that we actually have projects in development for. You know, when people are talking about difficulties with distance learning for students who don't have access, you know, equity issues around internet, et cetera. So we are actually working on several products in response to that, on, you know, how to do some distance learning with print materials, for example. Those are in various stages of development, but we will definitely continue to share those, you know, and I will continue to share those with this group as we follow up going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I think, Kirsten, is a lot of the strategies we talked today about professional learning would work with students. This was designed about thinking about adult learning. And so we incorporated some of that learning theory, adult learning theory, in thinking about, so how do adults learn, especially as how do we help them learn to be better with kids? And some of that other aspect is there. And yeah, there are some resources. My wife's a teacher, and I know the struggle she goes is trying just to get kids who don't have access. But
yeah, it's interesting
to align
to see
adult learning theory for this one.
It is interesting. It is interesting to see in the chat how many people have mentioned issues with students in addition. We do also have you know, some videos coming out that are adaptable, I think, for online learners, or for adult learners rather. And so much of that content, I think, and that's a good point. Good point, Kent. But much of the content that we do have coming out, I think, will be useful for this group as well.
I think wrap up with you.
Yep.
Megan.
Yeah, so we shared a few different strategies for things to consider as you move to a virtual platform for your professional learning. These are, again, the 3 icons, the 3 areas that we've considered with each of these strategies. But we want to leave you with these 3 ideas, one for each of them. First, adult learners are generally self-directed and self-motivated, and they learn in ways that build their existing strengths. So as you develop professional learning for them, intentionally lever these characteristics. When it comes to high quality professional learning, principles of that do not change, whether it's delivered in person or virtually. How you apply those principles may change, but the principles themselves, the things that make strong and good professional learning, those don't change. So keep those the same. And finally, when it comes to putting those together, remember that teaching and learning online is a new territory for many educators. So be patient and flexible, not only with them, but with yourself as you work through tech issues like we have had today will be a reality. So making as many of those a non-issue as possible, and then being patient and flexible as you navigate this new landscape will help both you and the people that you're trying to help learn. And Kent's going to take us to circle back then to that very initial question of, that we discussed in the first place.
We started thinking, asking you to think about what's still in place, what's making a positive difference in student learning and in teachers' practices and knowledge. And we think that's where you have to start when developing something for online. What's working? Whether it's online or in person, what has worked for you? And start with your assets, things that are happening that are making a difference. And then as Megan started off with developing a team and then saying, so how do we do what is our strength? And build that into an online platform to meet the learner, to meet the variety of learners. The thing I think we have to allow, which is tough because we didn't have a lot of planning time, this takes time. It really has to take time to think about how do we put this professional learning together for people. But start with what's working currently in your district and build it on the assets that you have. And I think it's back to you, Kirsten.
All right, thank you, Kent. I think now we have a few minutes left for questions if anyone has specific questions for Kent or for Megan. I did push out our survey link in the chat as well. I'll go ahead and do that again. We'd like to ask you to take that survey. It's very, very brief. It's I think it's maybe 4 or 5 scaled questions and then a couple of open-ended questions. Because that helps us know, what we did well, what you might like to see more of, and what we can change, absent hopefully the technical issues, but also what you might like to see, going forward. So if you could take that survey for us, that would be much appreciated. We will also push that out in our follow-up email. We are saving the chat, so we're going to go ahead and, as I mentioned before, categorize those reflection questions and send those out to you. One of the things that I personally really enjoyed about this group and about this webinar today was the engagement and the ideas and the sharing of what everyone's already doing. So that's really helpful. And so I would love to see that kind of pulled together into a document, and we'll do that, and we'll share that with you, and hopefully keep the conversation going. So I think right now we're ready for some questions. Diane says there's an issue with the survey. Thank you, Diane. I'll go back and I'll take a look at that and revise that as needed. I'm not sure what might have happened there. So if you have any questions, feel free to jump into the chat with those. I think at this point, participants could also unmute themselves if they'd like to ask a question directly. We do have a question from Stephanie about offering a lot of one-day workshops to districts. So the question is, does anyone have a basic template of what a one-day workshop would look like? That it would be broken up because they don't want people to sit for 7 hours. So if anyone has any ideas around that or would like to follow up with that.
Well, I'll just share some of the thoughts that we've had internally is that, because we've done lots of 1- and 2-day workshops, and we agreed none of us would want to sit through that from a virtual standpoint. And so we're trying to break it up into multiple sessions. The first question we had to say, is there some background information that we can present asynchronously to participants prior to us doing some things? And so that's where we're beginning our conversations. And then we're talking about how do we involve people and what do they do with that asynchronous information through some collaboration, and then thinking about what do we need to do live and coming back. So we're trying to get away from that and maybe put it into no more than 90 minutes at a time.
So that does answer Kelly's question around a maximum number of hours suggested for a virtual session. And then Jill would like to hear more ideas from attendees on what's working in their districts. She's doing a series of 1.5-hour online trainings for a district, plans to use polls, breakout rooms, and a short stretch break, and is asking for any other ideas. So, you know, and again, what's been so fun about this today is that everybody is coming to this with, you know, ideas and their best thinking about that. So if there's anything that anyone can share with Jill, that would be great.
I think too, one of the things that I want to add on is much like face-to-face professional learning, it doesn't actually matter. The rule of thumb or the most ideal number of hours, right, is dependent upon how you break up that time. We know that when we're working, we're as teachers, we're really good about this with first grade students, because we know that we'll be swimming upstream if we try to do anything for longer than 15 or 20 minutes in a consecutive amount of time. They just don't have, their interest levels don't stay that long. Well, the same is true for adult learners, right? You at any point, particularly if you're doing a virtual professional learning, you are trying to be more engaging than Amazon or their email inbox. So to do that, you want to break up your professional learning, no matter the length. Kent and I are in the process of planning a 3-hour professional learning synchronous opportunity. But that won't be 3 hours of Kent and I talking at people. That will be a time for us talking and then a time for them to work in groups and possibly, you know, come and talk to us one-on-one virtually, and then back to groups, maybe doing some reading or an activity. But breaking that up, no matter how long or short that that learning opportunity is vital.
Okay, so let's see. So Kelly has a suggestion for Jill in a 2.5-hour session adapted from a 6-hour live session. Agrees that breakout rooms are critical, sometimes repeating or varying with new groups. One suggestion is to have participants bring a quote from the reading, provide templates for the breakouts, and share a favorite meme to create a slideshow ahead of the session. So that sounds like a fun idea. And then a lot of there's a question, a lot of emphasis is on online learning now. So what are the other possibilities and methods for students who do not have devices and access to the internet?
So as Kirsten was saying, this is something that we in the REL have been working a lot on. As you may or may not imagine, many of the jurisdictions that we work in, our students have no, even if they had a smart device, they don't all have computers at home. They certainly aren't all connected to any kind of internet, especially high-speed internet. And so we are developing some different resources to work with and to support the principals and district leaders with essentially how can we get learning, how can we take learning, give them opportunities aside from creating packets. I think one of the most powerful out there right now, something that we're talking about and including in this, is project-based learning, where students have an opportunity to really come up with ideas and find ways to actually make a difference in their community, real life, real engaging projects that are integrating many content areas. And that's something that I think has the power to be able to be motivating to students because they choose the content, they choose the subject, but also has the power to do some real good in their own communities. So that's one of the things I might suggest. I'm sure there are other suggestions out there as well.
Kirsten, I'd like to reply. Sam asked a question about best PDs for teachers. And I'm going to tell you, Sam, I have a bias, so you're going to hear about that right now. I think teachers have to, I think we've seen in an online environment when we have teachers that don't have good instructional skills. And so as I've talked to superintendents and principals all over, they're realizing that their teachers who were good they had good instructional skills are then able to just learn the platforms to deliver the instruction, where some had bad instructional skills becomes bad instruction online. And so I would start with making sure we have a common understanding of what good instruction looks like, and then transferring that to online. I said I had a bias with it.
Okay, other questions? Anyone? So it sounds like we can give everybody a few minutes of their afternoon back or morning, depending on where you're located. So here's another comment from Gretchen about her teachers have needed support in ways to onboard parents to online instruction, and the teachers need support in managing their time when working in a 24/7 environment. Many teachers are overwhelmed because they're giving everything a level of urgency, and the amount of parent support is also something that teachers need additional support with.
I think we've underestimated the impact on parents in being teachers with their kids and trying to do work. And I think that we have not done as good a job in preparing parents for how they do that. I don't have the answer for what that's going to look like, but I think we maybe need to thinking about, how do we help parents in that 24/7 environment, be their child's teacher. A lot of our friends that have young kids are saying, we don't want to be a teacher, because tomorrow happens to be the last day of school for my wife, and they're all dancing in the street. But yeah, I think we have not helped parents to the degree that we should have.
I think that perhaps many conversations this summer will be around that, around how do we support teachers better, how do we support parents better if this continues to next year. That this summer, if I was still in an administrative role, how would my considerations for professional learning for my teachers for the summer would focus on the things that Kent just talked about, good instruction, because if you lack those skills, it is exacerbated moving to a virtual environment. And then now that we have time to think a little, now that we have time to breathe a little, what supports do our teachers need over the summer? What supports are our parents going to need? We, as Kent mentioned earlier, and as you all know, no one, this happened so fast that all of us have been working in reaction. And my hope for all of you in any environment each of us are working in is that maybe we have a moment here to breathe and to be able to act looking towards the fall instead of sort of react to what's happening. And hopefully as you consider professional learning, you'll have that opportunity this summer to consider instructional practices, how to support parents, how to support students, what kinds of things you have to have in place.
I think a forgotten group are our school principals, and professional learning is definitely, needed for them. Is how do we help principals lead in this environment? And I think that we've been so quick to try to do some things, is I think that we need to talk about not only the parents and not only the teachers, but how do we help our principals lead in an online environment? So possibilities for other webinars.
It seems like it, actually. I'm noticing there's another comment here from Charles about how many parents are very much affected by the pandemic, particularly those who have lost their jobs. And so education might be the least of their concerns at the moment. But there's definitely a lot of content to mine, I think.
Charles, 100%. And because of that, their students, education in school is not, students might be babysitting, students might be working, students might, education may not be the first thing on their list. And, we have to be aware of that and honor the fact that that's true.
What's encouraging is again, as I talk to colleagues all over, is that the questions that we're asking is that they're asking too. They are trying to fix some things that have not worked. I think we've done a good job considering, how fast we did this in public education, and we have not been quick in public education to make any adaptations. Doesn't mean that we are perfect by any ways, but I'm encouraged by the questions that people are asking about what they need to do next to make a difference for students, teachers, leaders, and parents. That's encouraging.
Okay, other questions? And I just want to emphasize also that Kent and Megan will be available. If you want to reach out with additional questions, you can feel free to email me directly, and I can put you in contact with Megan and Kent to continue the conversation. We will again pull the notes from the chat box. There are a lot of really, really good ideas and great things that people shared. So we'll share that with you in our follow-up email. And the video of this will be available as soon as we get it closed captioned and accessible for everybody. So we'll share that link going forward as well.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.